All right. Third community interaction symbiosis. Okay. So this symbiosis is a really close connection between two different organisms. And so we see we've got various types of symbiosis. So our first one here is mutualism. Within mutualism, both organisms are getting a benefit from this relationship that they're in. Okay, so lichens are a great example. We've got all sorts of algae that live within these lichens, which are sometimes ascomycete fungi, sometimes other type of fungi. But the algae living in these lichens gain protection. They've got a source of water, so they're benefiting. And then the algae are doing photosynthesis and providing carbohydrates and sugars for the lichens, so they get to benefit from this association as well. Okay, so in a mutualism, we're getting benefit on both sides. Okay, here we've got a termite. Termites have a protist known as trichonympha that exists in their gut. So as they're chewing wood and ingesting that, the trichonympha help break that down, that cellulose, into sugars that the termite can then digest more easily. Okay, so both organisms are benefiting from this relationship. Okay, our next type of symbiosis here is commensalism. This is where one of the species in the relationship is benefiting and it's not really doing anything to the other one. It's perfectly fine. It's not hurting it, but it's not helping it. It's neutral. So we've got epiphytes like a bromeliad here. It is growing on this tree branch. Okay, so it's getting a place to live and grow on this tree, but it's really not harming the tree and it's really not helping the tree either. And so we've got commensalism. We've got the sea anemone and clownfish. Now, there are potential arguments that you could say this is mutualism, but for the most part, the clownfish is safe within the sea anemone, but it's not doing a whole lot of services for the sea anemone itself. Now, there are some relationships where the clownfish does bring food to the sea anemone, and so that would then push us over into mutualism rather than commensalism. Okay, so the clownfish in this scenario isn't hurting the anemone, but it's not helping it, but the clownfish does get protection. Okay, our third symbiosis is parasitism. One organism benefits, and the association is negative. It's harming the other organism. So here we've got the guinea worm. This is a parasite in humans. If they drink water that has water fleas with guinea worm larvae in it, these guinea worms can grow. They grow a couple of feet long in the leg, and there's an opening for them to breathe down at the base of the foot, and they can be pulled out, but it's supposed to be extraordinarily painful. And so, in order to get relief from this pain, individuals will go and they'll put their feet in some body of water, and then the guinea worm releases its larva into that body of water. And if that water is not sterilized, then it passes the guinea worm to these other individuals. Okay, so it's a bad deal here, but the guinea worm benefits. That human that's infected is harmed. Okay. So as we look at how energy moves through a community, through an ecosystem, we look at different trophic levels. Okay. And as we look at trophic levels, we're kind of looking at how that energy is going ultimately from the sun through organisms, passing from organisms like our photosynthesizers to those that consume them, and then those that consume those organisms, and so on. So our different trophic levels are all here. We've got our producers, our autotrophs. These are organisms that do photosynthesis. Most of the time, this is going to be plants, algae, phytoplankton, cyanobacteria. Okay, these things that do photosynthesis. Producers get their energy from the sun. Okay, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions. Primary consumers, herbivores. These are organisms that are eating the producers. Secondary consumers, carnivores and omnivores. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. Tertiary consumers are organisms that are going to eat secondary consumers. And sometimes you'll see quaternary consumers, which eat tertiary consumers. So these are top of the food chain. You'll see here that decomposers and detritivores are listed under all of the consumer listings because depending on the decomposer or detritivore, they're going to eat at different trophic levels, but they're eating things that have died and they're breaking those down, getting energy from these things that have died. Okay? So the trophic levels, again, different feeding levels. We've got producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary. In what we see that approximately 10% of the energy is actually transferred to the next trophic level. Okay. And this is because a lot of energy is just wasted due to various survival. The food that they get, they can't break down 100%. And we waste a lot of energy in the form of heat, and it's just given off. And so this 10% is a rule of thumb by ecologists. It's not 10% in reality, but it makes the math really easy. So if we look at producers, okay, and let's say from the sun, they're creating 10,000 units of energy. When we get to our primary consumers that are consuming the producers, we're down to 1,000 units. Then our secondary consumers eat those primary consumers, we're down to 100. And then a tertiary consumer eats the secondary, and we're down to 10. And so we've lost lots of energy. Okay, we're down 1,000 times what we started with as we go up these trophic levels. Okay, so what would be an advantage of being a vegetarian? Okay, an herbivore. And so this is kind of what we look at. Is here we've got our human vegetarian getting about 10% of the food from whatever vegetables they're eating. But then if you are a carnivore, you're only getting essentially 1% of that original vegetation energy. Okay. And so we see that there's an efficiency to being a vegetarian as long as you have a varied diet and are getting all the nutrients and protein that you need. Okay. Why are many large predators endangered? Their food supply gets limited. Something happens to their food supply. They require lots and lots of food. And so they are more likely to see decreases in their population because they require so many calories and they're getting such a small share of it overall. So this just shows the same things. Let's say we've got 1,000,000 joules of sunlight. 10,000 of that goes to our primary producers, 1,000 that to the primary consumers, then 100, and then 10 joules in that tertiary consumer. Okay? And so what we've been looking at so far are food chains. Okay, and this is transfer of energy from one trophic level to another. It's a direct link from producer, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary consumers, and so on. Okay, one organism eats another, eats another, eats another. It's a simple way to look at what's happening in a community. Now, a food web is a much better illustration of what's actually happening within a community because an owl isn't only eating mice, right? They're going to eat shrews and they're going to eat other birds and all sorts of other things. And so a food web looks at a habitat as a whole and it looks at all of the different interactions that occur in that area. So within a food web, we've got a bunch of different food chains within it, showing all of the different things that are happening. Okay. And that is the end of chapters 41 and 42.